When you start a new project, typically you need things like a domain name, hosting, things like that. When I choose hosting, I pick mine for the options it gives. I like to know what I'm getting and set things up just how I like them. This is why for your projects, you should check out Linode. Linode servers feature native SSD storage, a 40 gigabyte network, and Intel E5 processors. That's all the power you need to run VMs under full control, or Docker containers, who doesn't love that, encrypted disks, and VPNs. Plus, they have 10 data centers across the world and add-ons like backups, Node Balancer, and Longview to help you control your server costs. They also offer block storage for your static files, and you can get started with a $20 credit if you use the code JavaScript Jabber 2018. That credit is good for 4 months on their 1 gigabyte server. That's a lot of time to try them out and see if they're the right fit for you. That code again is JavaScript Jabber 2018. Also, if you're interested in working for Linode, they're hiring. Head to linode.com/careers to see their available positions. Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Adventures in Angular. This week, we're talking to... Oh, I forgot to ask how to say your name. Let me try and slaughter it, and then you can tell me how you say it.
Great.
Tomek Sułkowski.
Great. It's all usually you just mispronounce the O. It's Sułkowski.
Sułkowski. Okay.
Yeah, that's it. But otherwise, great.
Yeah, I'm always like, I'm talking to this cool person, and then I'm like, and I have no idea how to say their name. So anyway, do you want to just give a brief introduction? Who you are, what you do?
Sure. Hello, everybody. So currently I'm working as a front-end engineer in a company named Unplug from LA, where we create these apps for these small Android devices that you can connect to a display to show your content in an attractive way, you know, like Yelp reviews on your hotel or some posts from social networks related to some events. And also for several years now, I've been working with a Sagas training company, running a lot of front-end workshops, mainly Angular focused. And so usually for some bigger European enterprises. But for example, last week I was doing a training for developers working in a Polish prison system. So that was something else. Yeah, so
interesting.
Angular stuff.
Very cool. So, so we found an article by you. Yeah, I was looking at the whole history of bringing you on. And you wrote an article which was kind of interesting, and we'll talk about this, and then maybe we can talk about just UX in general for Angular. And your article was basically talking about not disabling the submit button and how that improves UX. And you have all these examples in your application about how if you put something in that has an error, blah, blah, blah. I'm not completely sure that I 100% followed it, but because I skimmed it more than read it. But yeah, do you want to just give us kind of an outline of what you're talking about here and why this is a better experience for people?
Sure. So, like, the idea is simple, really, and we had this in, say, traditional web applications for years now. It's that when you have a form, and usually the bigger form, the bigger it is a problem for users. So, when you have a form and it's partly submitted, some fields are, for example, required, but the user hasn't got to it and didn't fill them. So. And the submit button is disabled. And that's very easy in Angular applications. But the user actually doesn't know why this button is disabled, right? So because he hasn't gone from all the fields, so he hasn't triggered, touched or dirty states, and the validations error didn't appear. So in older applications, let's say single page applications, it was usually always enabled because we barely were using JavaScript, and we were sending the form and the backend was showing us all the errors, right? And so my idea here is to just use a simple directive, and by showing you how to write this directive, I also wanted to hint to several parts of Angular that are not so obvious. And with that directive, you basically leave the button enabled, and once you click it, it triggers all the touched states, and
right.
therefore it displays all the errors. And if the form is actually valid, it will just submit it as if it would with normal click event.
Yeah. Now that you've kind of explained it, this makes sense to me. I think the example that I run into is I'll be working on a field, and it's not the disabled button that really bothers me so much as it is. I'll be filling in a form and I'll tap the tab button one extra time, and then it highlights that field and says, "Hey, you've got to fill this in," or "Hey, the input's not valid." And I'm like, "Why are you yelling at me? I just tapped the button an extra time."
Yeah.
Just so stuff like that, where it's kind of an interrupt on my process of just filling in all the info. And I really like the idea of, okay, click submit and then fill everything in. Okay, this is all filled in. It's all changed. And hey, this one, not valid. So I'm going to notify you then, because that's when you're looking for the feedback.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so that's, I try to show developers that, to think about how the user will use it, and to be, polite to a user. So what you said, like, don't scream at the user with no good reason, right? So show him the errors when he is about to do something stupid, like, or when he will get himself into more trouble. But otherwise, don't do it, right?
Yep, absolutely. Well, the thing is I've always used the disable submit button for when you actually submit a form. Just to kind of debounce the input in case they click it twice, so it doesn't send the same request twice. And I think that's where my disconnect was, is I was like, but you have to. And then, oh no, you're talking about something completely different. So
yeah. In one of our apps, we were doing this approach. Well, we wanted to show it as a disabled, but we also wanted to show the user why it is disabled. So when he hovers the button, it will show him like some pop-up message. But it's actually impossible to do it with a disabled button, because there are no, on disabled items, there are no mouse events. Yeah, so we are actually showing a different button with styled as a disabled, but with no click event on it, right? So it was only for showing this tooltip. So yeah, that's a different approach.
Yeah, that makes sense. So are there other things that people do that hurt their user experience? Because this seems like a relatively easy fix. I mean, it's not, just use this directive or use this component and you're solved, right? But you give us a pattern, and if you look through the examples, there are a handful of lines of code really that you're adding to your app. So are there others that are kind of at that level of easy that make your UI that much easier to use for your users?
I'm not sure about this simple examples, but I was also recently looking into, for example, animations, and as for the whole material design and so on, it popularized the animations as something that we need to have to improve the user experience. And in Angular, for example, it's fairly easy to add animations for example, routing. And it was always bugging me with those online examples where you have animations going through different, when you have animations attached to routes, and when you go through different pages, the animation is always going in one direction, right? It's usually like left to right or right to left, but it's always the direction. But it doesn't make much sense if you have, for example, like a horizontal menu and you have one item after another. So if you go through, click from third item to fourth, it makes sense that it goes from left to right. But if you go from the fourth back to third, it should go the opposite direction, right? So that's another thing that is so simple in Angular to do this one direction animation that usually developers don't think about it, but it's not that super hard to implement something that works in both directions. And I've actually wrote another article just on that one about router animations. And I actually named it the tricky bits because it's not that simple. You basically need to know one thing is that when you have, for example, when you route from one path to the same path with the just changed parameters, right? When you have like users slash 123, users slash 124, it's the same route. So Angular doesn't create a new component for it. So the on enter and or leave animations won't work. So to overcome that, you actually have to turn that off and apply a router reuse strategy, and then it will work. So that's a bit, that's a tricky part actually. But other than that, it works really, really well. And you can look at the screen recording that I put on the post, and it looks nice. Speaking about animations, for example, one thing that makes experience better is just to add these small animations that you can use this third-party CSS libraries and just add or remove classes without implementing, this Angular DSL animations, and just have, this funny little, bubbly animations appearing. So it's also pretty simple to use. Just, install library, add and remove class, and there you have it, better experience.
Yeah, I think sometimes we overcomplicate some of this stuff, right? Where, it's, I need to put the animation in my CSS, in my component, and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you know what? We used to do this by adding a class in jQuery. And sometimes it's just easier to do that, right? It's simpler. We know what's going on. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I want to show all these simple solutions because sometimes, the developers like zero in on those specific things that they saw in like documentation somewhere and try to overthink it. And after a while, they can get really discouraged with the tool entirely, with the like even framework and so on. So for example, in my trainings, I try to show them the possibilities, but also show the easiest solutions for specific problems, so they can, if something is easy, you want to do it more. And then if you go to something, have some more complex problem, you have so much, velocity from the easiest things that you have, some more energy to overcome the more complex problem.
Awesome. So when you do your training, what is the approach you take when you're talking to people about UI? I mean, that's been kind of the focus so far in what we've talked about. So do you give people like rules of thumb, or do you generally give them approaches like this, or?
Yeah. So first of all, if you think about the user, that's the general rule, and try to figure out the laziest way to implement something for a user. Then you can, of course, refactor it and so on. But so I'm going to it from these two approaches. The one way is just the user one, and the other one is more technical one. So like basics, really basics. For example, a lot of developers don't know HTML that well, even if they work with it, even if they are front-end developers. So like this disabled thing that we're keep coming back to. So For example, I've seen a lot of applications where developers try to add disabled on a element or link element, and even if that visually works, it doesn't. It will still register the event, right? Because disabled can be added only on form elements. So and the other one is that, for example, when developer sees that the button element inside of the form always triggers the submit when you have like enter, when you press enter inside of the form, the button submits, and when you have several buttons, the first button will be submitted, will be activated, right? So they usually implement it as a link element. So just use button type button, like these simple things, right? Which doesn't submit. Or input type. Well, I always, on every training, and I've done like 50 of them, I always ask, what is the best input element for search input? And
for search input?
Yeah. And so what is the best element?
I feel like this is a trick question. I want to say, oh, it's your generic text field, but...
Yeah, but input type search.
Is there a type search?
Yeah, and it's been there for a long time, really. So, I haven't heard this answer once, so don't feel bad about it. But basics, really.
No, I feel bad about it. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but it's so simple, and it's also, perfectly safe because, fall back to text anyway. So, but it gives you like this cool small improvement that escape clears the input when you press the escape. So like for filtering and so on. And it also gives you this small widget, this small X symbol on the right. So you can press it and it clears it. But it's simple stuff, really. And and forms are my like go-to things to ramble about. But and so, for example, the rule of thumb about buttons. So basically, everything that you click on your application should be either a link or a button, with very small exceptions. And people don't realize that you can put a lot of things inside of buttons, and it already makes this interface much more usable, right? Because you can tab into it, you can activate it from a keyboard, and so on. And it's also better for users with disabilities.
So on that count, let's get into the nitty gritty, right? There is a submit input type. So don't use that then?
Well, I don't think there is much of a difference right now. I think you can use them button type submit, I think is.
Oh, is that legal too?
Yeah. And I guess if I remember correctly, the best way to check is to check it against screen readers, and I think they both did it properly.
Okay.
Yeah. So there is this tool. Let me see, called Wave. WAVE. That will show you all the things, or maybe not all the things, but a lot of things about accessibility. So the things like how the screen reader will treat your buttons, text elements, and so on. So you can easily just add this. This is a plugin for Chrome, and just turn it on and see what it shows about your form or your app in general.
Sounds good. So when you're building forms, do you usually just use a component that puts form elements on the page, or do you use some of the form libraries that are out there that that people have built? I'm thinking like, what is it? Formly?
Formly, yeah. I haven't worked with that, but that's probably because I'm not working with bigger like enterprise grade software. I'm mostly working with a software where there are limited number of quite small forms, but instead you have to really tinker the experience, because it's mostly for like a smaller user base, and we need to make it behave really well, and we need to have full control over it. So
Right.
And often, in most cases, I actually use template-based forms. Maybe I'm a bit old school because right now, like reactive forms seems to be preferred. They are also like much more flexible, but for most cases, template-driven forms are just good enough.
Now, what do you mean by template-driven forms?
I mean like ng model, and instead of reactive form, just using an ng model.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, but like in Angular 1, for example, we only had this solution, right? ng model based, and we could already do basically everything. Some parts were more complex than others, but it was fairly sufficient solution. So if I'm not doing anything really, really weird and reactive by nature, I'm not using the reactive forms.
Gotcha.
Need to create a complex enterprise Angular application? Angular Bootcamp is an intensive 3-day workshop class to learn the basics of Angular through sophisticated techniques for real-world applications. We target Angular 6 and the recent versions, with much of the curriculum is suitable back to Angular 2. Or go beyond the 3-day class with a consultation or project launch with Oasis Digital, the team behind Angular Bootcamp. We can assist your team or launch your project with advanced Angular topics including scalability, data flow, state management, full stack product design, and more. Contact us for a private class at your location or buy a ticket for public classes in various cities around the U.S. and occasionally in Europe. Online live instructor training is also available at angularbootcamp.com.
So are there any other tips that you have for forms and UX and UI that you just are kind of your favorites?
Not only for forms, but I was looking recently at how to even building this directive for this disabled button or not disabled button. I was looking at the way to pass the form to the directive itself. And my previous approaches were always to just create an input for like an Angular input for an element or directive and pass the form reference to it. But you can instead actually inject it. And yeah, I didn't know it for a long time. And actually one, I think, useful thing to know is I don't know if many people uses Augury like on daily basis. Usually you just see it, oh, it's cool, but otherwise you just use, like good old sources tab and debug it in traditional way. But actually Augury shows you instance providers that are available in your components tree. So that's where you can see what is available to inject inside of your components. So instead of, for example, passing this form as an input into component and directive, you can just take it from an instance provider and inject it into a constructor.
Oh, that sounds interesting. I'll have to dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, there's also like in most general, like on maybe not a lot of Angular developers design their apps, but sometimes we just have like only a general mockups and actually do these animations and figure out how the animations work themselves. So I would recommend you to just look into and read some of the Medium posts by the UX designers. That's Yeah, they are very inspiring. And even if you don't find it useful to implement it in your own app, you can just try to use it as a training exercise to, just implement this or that cool animations. So yeah, I was actually doing that recently, and I found out some interesting ways of animating things based on a specific article. Let me actually check this one. Yeah, there is this article, Creating Usability with Motion, the UX in Motion Manifesto. And the guy there is showing a lot of really cool and really like well collected examples of animations. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I've had a few people talk to me about this. I think Lucas Rubelkey's done a few talks about it, who is a panelist on the show. And yeah, a lot of folks have talked about, hey, it's not just cool stuff you can put on your page, but it actually draws the eye where you need it and helps people recognize that something happened. And yeah, there are a lot of payoffs for that.
Yeah, but it also even the fact that it looks cool, it makes your like animation just more pleasant to use. Just don't overdo it, of course, because like several times we've been adding animations to our project, and one additional tip is don't make it too slow, because when you design it or implement it, you just you are looking into it in fine details, and but your users can use it multiple times a day, and it will just seem sluggish. And so, for example, in one application we had this a lot of animations, and at one point we just made them faster, like 3 times faster. And our product owner just asked us what we do to the performance, because like the whole app was super speedy, but it was also always speedy. It was just the animations that were just too slow. So yeah, that's the small but I think important part. But other than that, they just make them fun. There is also this one cool idea that relates to forms and to animations, where you have like a login form, and you put some mascot over it, and it tracks with his eyes or his head movement. It tracks what you type in your email or your login input. But when you go to a password, it just covers his eyes or something like that. Yeah, so it's like it's not super like important, but it's like it makes users smile, so it makes application probably a bit more successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. And some people will like it and some people won't. And I think that's part of the reason why folks avoid sometimes some of these options. But the reality is that if that, I've been doing a bunch of business coaching with a friend of mine, and he's really big on the mission, vision, values kind of thing, part of the business. And so, and all of those kind of speak to the core of who you are as a person or as a company. And so if that's what your company's about, you love the fun, the whimsy, the goofy, whatever you want to put in there, put it in. Yeah. Put it in. Because, you're not going to attract, all the general public people, but there are going to be people who love those kinds of features that stay with you because your personality, your culture as a business matches up with them. And there's a lot of power behind that. There's a lot of mileage you can get from that. So don't discount things like that. I think a lot of people are kind of rolling their eyes and going, I don't think I'd want to do that. And, I just want to make the case, maybe you do.
Yeah, the most important part, like rule of thumb, is just don't stand in the way of the user. So don't make those stuff just the user tasks harder.
Right.
But other than that, yeah, look into how you want your app to appear and make it more attractive.
Cool. Well, anything else that we should dive into before we do picks?
No, I think we can leave at that, really.
Awesome.
My general summary would be just to see what the UX and designers are figuring out, and even if not doing it in your super business solution, just try to do it as a side project. It will also give you some better understanding of what is available or what is possible in browser and different parts of Angular itself. And one last thing is don't zero in on specific one solution, one way of doing animations. Yeah. So for example, currently I'm working on very complex, the application itself is simple, but the animations there is very, very complex. And actually our Angular animations were not enough for me. Mm-hmm. So you have a bit, much better flexibility. I've implemented all the animations with RxJS and Web Animations API. And what is surprising, it's not that much harder than the Angular DSL. So I would say that it's pretty comparable. So yeah, I would encourage you to also look into that.
Awesome. Now, if people want to go read more of what you've written, I'll put a link to your Medium in here. But do you also post to Twitter, or post stuff to GitHub, or anywhere else?
I try to be active, but also to the point on Twitter. So I'm Sulco, Sulco on Twitter, right. And Tomsu on Medium. Yeah, so. I try to stay on point, as I said, on Angular mainly stuff, but also some, small tidbits, some small useful tidbits for general front-end audience.
Awesome. Sounds great. All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Since I'm the only panelist today, I guess I'll go ahead and do some picks. The first pick that I have is Mattermost. Mattermost is a chat system. It's very comparable to Slack. I use it for my production team for the podcasts and a few other things. And I actually have a Slack channel for Adventures in Angular. So I'm trying to get that link published. I'll make sure it goes into the show notes. In fact, I'll just paste it in right now. If you want to join and just chat and have conversations, to have you in there. I'll copy and paste that in, and we'll make sure that people can get to it. But yeah, I'm hoping to have some conversations there. We also have the devchat.tv forum, and that's based on Discourse, which I also really enjoy. So I'm going to pick those. And then I just found the Brave browser. And if you're not familiar with it, Brave is a browser that's put together by Brendan Ike and a bunch of other folks. that worked at Mozilla basically. And the way that it works is, well, there are a couple of things. One is that it has, I'm trying to remember all the features that it has, but it's really freaking fast. And it has pretty fine-grained privacy settings, which I also really like. But the other thing that's interesting to me is that you can actually use it to donate to the website you visit. So it'll look at your browsing history and it'll say you spent 70% of your time on Facebook and 20% of your time on devchat.tv. And then you can say, well, Facebook sells the ads to, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe Facebook doesn't need my money. And so you take them out of the running and then it says, okay, well, 60% of the rest of your time was spent on devchat.tv. And then you got 20% on, on somebody's blog or somebody's website or something like that, or angular.io. And you're like, you know what? I am going to donate to these. And so you can actually donate. They call them Brave or basic attention tokens. And yeah, you can just go support those different providers with that kind of thing. It works for YouTube channels. So if you're going to, if you go to the devchat.tv YouTube channel, the money doesn't go to YouTube, it goes to me. So anyway, if you spend a lot of time looking at YouTube or on various websites and you're thinking, you know what, I'd like to give $10 a month and split it up based on how much I use these different websites, then it's definitely something that's worth checking out. And I think it's an interesting way of democratizing some of the value that people put out on the internet for free. Tomek has put up a bunch of blog posts, that are valuable. And so it'd be nice to see them work into Medium, right? So that you could say, oh, I read his Medium post and, let's send him some money. And so, yeah, I think projects like this are really helpful. And open source support, we have some continuity problems there sometimes. And so, let's get out there and support people. Anyway, those are my picks. What are your picks?
So several books, maybe. One, the most important for me recently was So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. Mm-hmm. It starts very interestingly that find your passion is a bad advice. And that actually, that's not how you should plan or go into your adult, professional life. So instead, you should have this craftsman's mindset, and the passion usually follows. So they interviewed a lot of professionals, and in this study by Yale University, and they concluded that if usually the longer the professional was working in his field, he had the more calling mindset, let's say, because you have more, impact, more control, more places for creativity, and that actually gives you most satisfaction, and that's where the passion comes from. So that's a really great book. And the second,
I just want to plus one that because I enjoyed the book too.
Yeah. The second pick is books I've read. This is a page actually by Derek Sivers. He's the guy who created the CD Baby project some time ago. He made a lot of money on selling that later, but he's reading a lot of interesting books and making a shorter and longer summary, mostly for himself, but you can also read it and just decide if you're interested in some books. He also rates them. So I usually go through when I'm looking for a book, I'm going through his list, and from 10, from the top rated books. So very good resource and rich. And the third pick would be the Man from Earth movie. And I'm picking it because it's fairly good, but I actually haven't seen a person or met a person who have seen it yet, other than the ones that I'm showing them to. So it's a very interesting movie. Like if you are fed up with those a lot of like Avengers ensemble big movies, it's something very opposite. Is if you're like in the mindset of like sitting in front of a fireplace and just listening to a story, it's something like this. And it also has a pretty interesting premise. I don't want to spoil it, but it's pretty cool. Yeah, and the last pick would be something more technical, Nest Framework. Do you know it?
Sounds familiar.
It's basically like Angular for the backend. It's created by Kamil Myśliwiec, and there's like it's TypeScript based. There are like a lot of decorators, like controller, module, all the things that you see in Angular. It's almost like at the first sight you might confuse it with Angular. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's already on version 5, so it seems to be developed very dynamically, and I've heard a lot of good things about it.
Very good. This looks cool. I'm going to put it on my list for JavaScript Jabber.
Sure. Yeah, it's also like if you use something like Spring in Java, it's also quite similar to it.
Right. All right, cool. Well, thank you for coming and talking to us. I really appreciate you taking the time, and keep writing these awesome articles, because I think it really helps people kind of visualize what they can or should be doing with Angular. And I see you've got a bunch of stuff on like CLI and Angular elements, and anyway, lots of stuff that people from this show will be interested in. So,
yeah, I want to show what things are available, and they are usually more easy than you would suppose.
Cool. Well, thanks again for coming. We're going to go ahead and wrap this episode up, but we will catch everyone next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.